poor black boy finds a white baby abandoned in the trash. But what happens next will move you to tears and restore your faith in family. Watch until the end. Share this video with someone who needs hope. And write in the comments which city you're from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. The cold wind of Detroit's early morning pressed against Jermaine's thin jacket, slipping through the frayed seams as if the air itself wanted to remind him that even breathing was something you had to fight for in this city. The sky was still dark, a soft purple hue hanging over the broken rooftops and cracked sidewalks, with the glow of streetlights flickering like tired eyes refusing to close. Shards of glass littered the curbs, crunching under his worn-out sneakers, the right shoe a size smaller than the left, both held together with tape and prayers. In the narrow hallway of a crumbling duplex, Jermaine tiptoed around a missing floorboard, careful not to wake his baby sister Tina, who lay curled on an old couch cushion beside the heater that barely worked. She slept with a soft whimper, clutching the earless teddy bear Jermaine found in a trash can months ago, the bear's fabric torn, one eye missing, yet it was Tina's only comfort in a world that had given her none. He looked at her tiny face, the way her small hand still reflexively curled around the fabric of her blanket, and for a moment he allowed himself to hope that she would never remember these days. In the kitchen, the air smelled of boiled water and dampness, the ceiling stained with brown circles from the leaks that dripped onto the floor every time it rained. His grandmother, Mama Jean, sat hunched over her cup of store-brand coffee, hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around the warmth of the cup. Her back was bent from years of cleaning houses that were never hers, her knees swollen, wrapped in bandages that needed changing. She looked at Jermaine with tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much disappointment to flinch anymore. "You going out, baby?" she asked, her voice a soft rasp that scratched the silence of the room. Jermaine nodded, adjusting the oversized backpack on his shoulder, checking inside to ensure his gloves, the empty plastic bags, and the rusted picker stick were all there. He didn't speak much in the mornings. Talking wasted energy he needed for the day ahead. Mama Jean didn't stop him. She knew there was no choice. Not in this neighborhood, not with the refrigerator humming empty most nights. Outside, the cold stung his cheeks as he walked past the burnt-out shell of a corner store that had caught fire during the riots, past the vacant lots where stray dogs sniffed the trash for scraps, past the stop sign with bullet holes that whistled in the breeze. The houses on either side of the street stood like sad skeletons, windows boarded up, doors missing, graffiti bleeding across the walls in bright colors that mocked the grayness of everything else. Jermaine didn't look at them. He kept his head down, eyes scanning the sidewalk for discarded cans, bottles, or anything worth even a few cents at the recycling depot. He moved like a shadow, practiced and quiet, slipping between alleys, stepping over broken glass, ducking under sagging fences. He knew where the good spots were, the places behind liquor stores where people dumped beer cans, the corners near the bus stop where commuters tossed soda bottles as they ran for the bus. Sometimes he found treasures, a half-full water bottle on a summer day, an unopened snack bag someone forgot. Those were days he called blessings, and he would save them for Tina, watching her eyes light up as she tasted something other than the stale bread they often soaked in water to make it easier for her to swallow. There was a rhythm to Jermaine's mornings, a quiet urgency that hummed in his bones as he worked. Each bottle dropped into his bag was another moment of hope, another promise to Tina that she would eat that night, that Mama Jean would have her medicine, that the heater might stay on for a few extra hours. He had become an expert in silence, in listening for the danger that lurked in voices around the corner or footsteps too heavy to be safe. The older boys in the neighborhood, with their hard eyes and quick hands, sometimes tried to take what he had collected. Once they had cornered him, pushed him to the ground, and emptied his bag into their own, leaving him with bruises on his ribs and nothing to show for a morning's work. Mama John had cried that night, rocking Tina back and forth, whispering prayers as Germain lay on the floor, biting his lip to keep from screaming each time he moved. But he didn't stop going out. He couldn't. Each day he rose before dawn, slipping out into the cold, determined to fill his bag before the sun rose high enough to bring the trouble out. The city changed as the light came, from empty and still to loud and restless. Sirens screamed. In the distance, horns blared. Voices shouted, and laughter sometimes echoed from the kids who still dared to play in the street. Jumping rope with frayed extension cords, their laughter rising above the noise like fragile birds trying to fly. Germain's favorite place was near the stadium, where people dropped cups and bottles after games or concerts, not caring where they fell. He could fill nearly half his bag in one morning there if he was lucky. Today, he moved quickly, bending to pick up cans, his gloved fingers moving fast, his breath forming small clouds in the air. A car passed by, music thumping so loud it rattled the windows, and for a second, Germain allowed himself to imagine sitting inside, warm, laughing with the music. But the thought faded as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold weight of reality. The weight of responsibility pressed on his thin shoulders as he worked, each bottle a reminder that Tina depended on him. When he found an aluminum can, he flattened it with his foot before slipping it into the bag, making room for more. Plastic bottles he tied together with string to keep them from blowing away. Glass bottles were risky. He wrapped them in cloth to keep them from breaking, each one worth a few precious cents at the depot. By midday, the sun struggled to break through the clouds, a pale light that offered no warmth. Germain's fingers were numb, but he didn't stop. He moved to the alley behind the gas station, the one place he sometimes found unopened drinks thrown out by drivers in a rush. As he rummaged through the trash, a sharp smell of gasoline mixed with the sour stench of rot, making his stomach turn. He ignored it, focusing on the glint of a can peeking from under a crumpled bag. He thought of Tina, of the way she looked at him with wide eyes each time he returned, the hope in her gaze as she waited for him to pull something from his bag, even if it was just a small candy or a piece of fruit he found. She would clap her tiny hands, her laughter the sweetest sound in Germain's world, the sound that kept him going when his legs felt like lead and the cold seeped into his bones. He remembered the nights when Tina cried from hunger, her stomach empty, her small hands clutching at him as if he could feed her with just his presence. Mama John would hum soft hymns, rocking her, tears slipping down her cheeks as she whispered prayers into the darkness. Germain would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain tapping on the roof, promising himself that he would never let Tina starve again. Today was no different. He would work until his bag was heavy, then take the long walk to the depot, exchange the cans and bottles for a few crumpled bills, and stop by the discount store for a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. If he had enough left, maybe he would buy Tina a small treat, a piece of candy or a juice box, something to make her smile. As he finished up near the stadium, his bag nearly full, he felt a momentary flicker of pride. It was a small victory, but in Germain's world, small victories were everything. He adjusted the bag on his shoulder, feeling the strain on his back, and began the walk home, his mind already planning how to stretch the money, how to keep the heater on for another night, how to make sure Tina's laughter continued to ring through their small, broken home. When he turned onto his street, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that reached out like dark fingers across the cracked pavement. He saw Mama John waiting on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, her eyes searching the road for him. As he approached, she smiled, a tired but genuine smile that made Germain's chest tighten with a warmth he rarely felt. He handed her the bag, and together they went inside, the door closing softly behind them, shutting out the world for a moment. That night, as the wind howled outside and the heater rattled in the corner, Germain sat on the floor, Tina in his lap, her head resting against his chest as he hummed softly, his hand gently stroking her hair. Mama John watched them from her chair, her eyes glistening in the dim light, the shadows dancing on the walls like memories of better days. Germain looked down at his sister, at the way her tiny hand gripped his finger, her breathing slow and even, and he made a promise to himself, a promise that echoed in the quiet room, that no matter how hard the streets were, no matter how heavy the weight on his shoulders, he would keep fighting. For Tina, for Mama Jean, for the small chance that someday they would have more than empty promises and broken dreams. And as the rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the window, Germain closed his eyes, holding Tina close, whispering to her that one day they would leave these streets behind. That one day they would find a place where the cold didn't seep through the walls, where laughter didn't have to compete with hunger, where the promise of tomorrow didn't feel like a lie. Outside, Detroit breathed its restless breath, the city that had taken so much from so many. But inside that small, broken home, Germain's quiet promise to his sister was enough to keep hope alive, even if just for another day. Germain woke before dawn, the gray light barely creeping through the torn curtain that hung over the cracked window. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind a cold dampness that clung to everything, soaking into the worn carpet, the sagging couch, even the thin blankets that covered Tina's small frame. She stirred slightly as Germain pulled on his jacket, the zipper catching on a frayed thread before sliding up with a sharp sound that seemed too loud in the quiet morning. He paused, waiting to see if she would wake, but she only sighed and turned, clutching her bear closer as if it could keep her warm in the chill. He glanced at Mama Jean, who was already awake, sitting in her chair by the window, hands wrapped around her cup of coffee, eyes distant. She nodded at him, the lines on her face deepening with the movement, and he nodded back, a silent exchange they had perfected over years of mornings like this, where words were wasted because the reality of what needed to be done was too heavy to speak aloud. Outside, the air was sharp and biting, the sky a heavy blanket of low clouds that threatened more rain. Puddles filled the potholes in the street, reflecting the dull glow of street lights that hummed softly, a low sound that mixed with the distant noise of traffic on the freeway. Germain pulled his hat lower over his ears, his breath puffing in small clouds as he made his way down the cracked sidewalk, the straps of his backpack digging into his shoulders with the familiar weight of responsibility. His feet carried him almost on instinct toward the old gas station on the edge of their block, the one that had been closed for years, its windows boarded up, graffiti scrawled across the walls in bright colors that seemed to scream against the grayness of everything else. The lot behind the station was littered with trash, old tires, rusted cans, broken glass that caught the little light there was and reflected it in tiny, angry sparks. It was one of his best spots for bottles and cans, a place people seemed to forget existed, leaving behind their empties as they cut through the lot, not caring where they fell. Germain moved quickly, bending to pick up bottles, flattening cans under his foot before slipping them into his bag. The soft clink of glass and metal, a rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. His hands were cold, the thin gloves doing little to keep out the chill, but he ignored the numbness, focusing instead on the task in front of him. Each bottle, each can, was another cent, another small piece of hope that he could bring home. Something tangible in a world that so often felt like it was slipping through his fingers. As he moved closer to the dumpster at the back of the lot, he caught a strange sound, a soft, almost inaudible whimper that made him freeze. He straightened, listening, the sound coming again, so quiet that he almost thought he had imagined it. Just the wind moving through the broken fence, the whine of a stray dog nearby. But then it came again, a soft, desperate sound that was unmistakable. A baby's cry, thin and weak, like the sound of a bird with a broken wing. His heart began to pound in his chest, a sudden fear washing over him as he stepped closer to the dumpster, his eyes scanning the piles of trash, the torn bags, the broken boxes. At first, he saw nothing, just the usual mess, the remnants of people's lives tossed aside without a second thought. But then, near the edge of the dumpster, partially covered by a dirty blanket, he saw it. A small basket, old and worn, the kind you might use for laundry or to carry groceries if you had no car. Inside, wrapped in a filthy towel that looked more like a rag, was a baby. She was so small, her skin pale, almost translucent, with a shock of light hair matted against her forehead. Her lips were tinged with blue, and her eyes, when they opened for a moment, were the soft gray of the sky above them. She whimpered again, a sound so fragile that it made Germain's chest tighten painfully, his breath catching in his throat as he stared down at her. There was a piece of cardboard tucked against her tiny chest, the words written in shaky handwriting, the ink smudged from the dampness of the morning. Her name is Lily. I'm sorry. For a moment, Germain couldn't move, couldn't think, the world narrowing to the sight of this tiny, helpless baby lying in the trash, abandoned, left to die in the cold. His mind screamed at him to leave, to walk away, to pretend he had never seen her, because he knew what this meant, what kind of trouble this could bring. A black boy, alone, found with a white baby in a neighborhood where police didn't ask questions before they put your face to the pavement, where accusations were easier to make than explanations. He took a step back, shaking his head, his hands trembling as they tightened on the straps of his backpack. He couldn't do this. He couldn't risk it. He had Tina to think about, Mama Jean, the small, fragile life they were barely holding together. Bringing this baby home would be the end of everything. The police would take him, take Tina, leave Mama Jean alone to die in that house, and this baby would still be gone, lost to the system, another statistic in a city that had too many already. But as he turned, ready to walk away, the baby whimpered again, her tiny hand reaching out from the blanket, fingers curling and uncurling as if searching for something, someone, to hold on to. Germain froze, the memory of Tina's cries in the night filling his mind, the way her small hands had clutched at him, her eyes wide with hunger and fear, the promise he had made to her that he would always protect her, always take care of her, no matter what. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning in his lungs, and stepped forward, reaching down with shaking hands to lift the basket from the trash. The baby was lighter than he expected, her body barely filling the blanket that was wrapped around her, her skin cold to the touch, her eyes closing as he lifted her, a soft sigh escaping her lips that sounded like relief. Germain pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around the baby as best he could, tucking the edges around her tiny body to keep out the cold. He glanced around the lot, his heart pounding, waiting for someone to shout, to see him, to call the police, but the lot was empty, the world silent except for the soft sounds of the city waking up around them. He slipped the basket into the crook of his arm, adjusting the straps of his backpack with his other hand, and began to walk, each step heavy with the weight of what he was doing, the fear of what would happen next. As he walked, the baby made soft, weak sounds, her breath uneven, her small body shivering despite the layers he had wrapped around her. Germain tried to keep his pace steady, to keep his breathing even, but his mind was racing, thoughts tumbling over each other in a frantic swirl of fear and determination. He knew what he was risking, what could happen if he was caught. But as he looked down at the baby in his arms, her face scrunched in discomfort, her tiny hand gripping the edge of his sleeve, he knew he couldn't leave her there. When he reached home, Mama Jean was waiting by the window, her eyes widening in shock as she saw him walking up the steps with the bundle in his arms. She opened the door quickly, stepping back to let him in, her hands fluttering at her sides as she tried to find the words that wouldn't come. Germain didn't speak, couldn't speak, as he moved past her, heading for the small room at the back of the house, the one they used for storage, the one where he kept the bottles and cans before taking them to the depot. He set the basket down carefully on an old blanket on the floor, unwrapping the baby from his jacket, checking to make sure she was still breathing, that her eyes were still opening, even if just a little. Mama John came to stand beside him, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she looked down at the baby, at the small, fragile life that had been left to die in the trash. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered, her voice breaking as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the baby's tiny hand, which closed around her finger with surprising strength. Germain looked up at her, his eyes wide, his chest heaving with the effort of holding back the fear that threatened to choke him. "Mama," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, "we can't leave her." Mama Jean closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she nodded, her hand tightening around the baby's fingers. "No, baby," she said softly, "we can't." They worked together, cleaning the baby as best they could with warm water and a soft cloth, wrapping her in an old towel that was the cleanest they had, placing her gently in a cardboard box lined with blankets to keep her warm. The baby whimpered and cried softly, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, her eyes opening every now and then to look at them with a gaze that was both empty and filled with a silent plea. That night, as the wind howled outside and the cold crept through the cracks in the walls, Germain sat beside the box, his hand resting gently on the baby's small chest, feeling the weak rise and fall of her breath, the fragile beat of her tiny heart. He didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, his mind filled with images of what could happen, of what might come, but as he looked at the baby, at the way she clutched his finger in her sleep, he made a silent promise, the same promise he had made to Tina, the promise that had kept him going through every cold morning, every empty night. "I will protect you," he whispered into the darkness, his voice steady, his eyes clear, "no matter what." And outside, the city of Detroit breathed, restless and cold, the world moving on in its indifferent rhythm. But inside that small, broken house, hope flickered to life, fragile and precious, in the form of a baby found in the trash and a boy who refused to let her die. The wind outside rattled the loose boards on the windows as Germain sat in the cramped storage room, the smell of cold concrete and old cardboard mixing with the faint scent of milk powder that hung in the air. He had spent the night on the floor beside the box, his head resting on the edge, his hand inside, feeling the soft rise and fall of Lily's tiny chest, her breath shallow but steady, her small fingers curling around his thumb with surprising strength whenever she stirred in her sleep. Each time she let out a soft, wheezing cry, he would hum gently, low enough not to wake Tina in the next room, his voice blending with the sound of the wind, promising Lily she was not alone anymore. When dawn broke, a pale gray light creeping across the chipped linoleum floor, Germain stretched the stiffness from his back and checked on Lily again. Her face was flushed, but her lips still held that faint bluish tint that made fear twist in his stomach every time he saw it. She didn't cry loudly. Her voice came out like a soft, breathless mule, her tiny body trembling when she tried to draw in a deeper breath. It reminded him too much of the nights he had spent holding Tina when she had a fever, begging God not to take her, whispering that he would be good, that he would find a way to get food, to get medicine, if only she would stay. In the kitchen, Mama Jean was boiling water on the old gas stove, her hands trembling slightly as she held the pot, her eyes dark with worry that she tried to hide behind a tired smile when Germain walked in. She nodded towards the cupboard where they kept the small can of powdered milk, nearly empty, each scoop a reminder of how little they had left. Germain measured out a careful portion, mixing it with warm water in an old baby bottle that Tina no longer used. The nipple cracked, but still working if you tilted it just right. He carried it back to the storage room, sitting cross-legged on the floor as he lifted Lily into his arms, feeling how light she was, like holding a bundle of rags rather than a living child. Her eyes opened for a moment, unfocused, her lips parting in a silent cry before she tried to latch onto the bottle, her small mouth struggling to find the nipple. Germain held it steady, tipping it gently so the milk wouldn't rush too quickly, watching as she swallowed, each gulp small and careful, her throat working with the effort, a line of milk dribbling down her chin that he wiped away with the edge of his sleeve. "You're doing good, Lily," he whispered, his voice soft, a small smile touching his lips as she managed to drink a few more sips before turning her head away, her tiny body exhausted from the effort. He held her against his chest for a while, feeling the faint warmth of her skin through the layers of blankets, listening to the slow, uneven rhythm of her breathing, hoping it would grow stronger with each passing day. The days that followed fell into a pattern, the rhythm of Germain's life shifting to include the constant care Lily needed. He would wake before dawn, slipping out into the cold streets to collect bottles and cans, moving quickly and quietly through the alleys and behind stores, avoiding the older boys who might steal his bag, ducking his head when police cars rolled by, their headlights sweeping across the cracked sidewalks. He moved faster now, the urgency of Lily's fragile life driving him, each can he dropped into his bag a promise that he was keeping, each bottle another moment of hope that he was fighting to hold on to. When he returned, his hands numb and his breath clouding in the cold air, he would find Mama Jean waiting with the small heater on in the storage room, warming the space as much as it could, which wasn't much at all. Together, they would check Lily's breathing, feed her small sips of milk, clean her with warm water and a soft cloth, wrapping her tightly in the blankets to keep her warm. Mama Jean would hum softly as she held Lily, rocking her gently when the baby's small body shivered, her eyes wet with tears she tried to hide from Germain. Tina, curious and confused, would sometimes peek into the room, her small face appearing in the doorway, her eyes wide as she looked at the bundle in the box. Germain would wave her over, letting her sit beside him, showing her how to hold Lily's tiny hand, how to stroke her soft hair without waking her. Tina would giggle quietly, the sound bright and clear in the cold, cramped room, a reminder of why Germain could not let fear stop him, could not let the danger of what he was doing keep him from fighting for this small life that had been left in the trash to die. The fear, though, was always there, a constant shadow that followed him with every step he took. The fear that the police would find out, that someone would see Lily in their home and call the authorities, that they would come and take her away, take Tina away, leave Mama Jean alone to die in that house with the peeling paint and the leaking roof. Germain would lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of the city outside, the distant sirens, the shouting, the occasional crack of a gunshot echoing through the streets, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if they were found out, if the thin thread of hope he was clinging to snapped under the weight of reality. Sometimes, when he was out collecting bottles, he would pass by the clinic near the bus stop, standing outside for a moment to listen to the nurses talking as they smoked their cigarettes, their words drifting on the cold air. He learned to listen for the words that mattered, words like breathing problems and congenital heart, words that made his stomach twist with fear as he remembered the way Lily's chest moved when she tried to cry, the way her lips sometimes turned a deeper blue when she struggled to breathe. One day, he heard a nurse mention a baby with a hole in her heart, how it made them weak, how they needed surgery or they wouldn't survive. Germain stood there, frozen, the words ringing in his ears, the image of Lily's face in his mind, her small mouth opening in a silent cry, the way her eyes would flutter shut as if even breathing was too much effort. He turned away, walking quickly down the street, his bag of bottles clinking with each step, the weight of what he could not do pressing down on him with every breath he took. That night, he sat beside Lily, her small hand curled around his finger, her breathing shallow and uneven, her tiny body trembling under the blankets. He leaned down, his forehead resting against the edge of the box, his eyes closing as he whispered to her, promising her that he would find a way, that he would not let her die, that he would do whatever it took to keep her alive, even if he had to give up everything he had to do it. The days grew colder, the wind sharper as winter pressed down on the city, the streets turning slick with ice, the cold seeping into their small house, no matter how tightly they tried to seal the windows, no matter how long they ran the heater. Germain's hands cracked and bled from the cold, his breath burning in his lungs as he moved through the streets, collecting bottles and cans, carrying them to the depot to exchange for a few crumpled bills that he handed to Mama Jean with a tired smile, pretending it was enough even when they both knew it wasn't. Lily's condition grew worse as the days passed, her breathing becoming more labored, her small body growing weaker, her cries even softer than before. Germain watched her with a constant fear in his chest, waking in the middle of the night to check if she was still breathing, pressing his hand against her chest to feel the faint beat of her heart, each moment of stillness a terror that made him hold his breath until she moved again, until he could feel the small warmth of her life against his skin. Mama Jean tried to comfort him, telling him that God would not bring Lily to them only to take her away, that there was a reason she had been left for them to find, that there was a purpose in the pain they were enduring. Germain wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to that hope, but each day it grew harder as he watched Lily struggle to breathe, as he saw the fear in Mama Jean's eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, as he felt the helplessness that came from knowing there was nothing he could do, no way to fix what was broken inside of Lily's tiny body. One night, As the wind howled outside and the cold pressed in around them, Lily's breathing became ragged, her small body trembling as she gasped for air, her eyes fluttering open with a look of fear that pierced Germain's heart. He lifted her from the box, holding her against his chest, rocking her gently as he whispered to her, telling her to hold on, to fight, to stay with him. Mama John stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears streaming down her face as she prayed aloud, her voice shaking with fear and desperation. Germain felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, the fear that he was losing her, that he would fail her the way so many had already failed her, that he would have to watch her slip away in his arms, unable to do anything to stop it. He held her tighter, his tears falling onto her small face, mixing with the sweat on her skin, his voice breaking as he whispered over and over, "Please, Lily, please." And in that moment, as the cold wind rattled the windows and the darkness pressed in around them, Germain made a decision, a promise, that was stronger than the fear, stronger than the reality of their situation, stronger than the weight of the world that threatened to crush him. He would not let her die. He would find a way, no matter what it took, no matter what it cost him. He would save her because she was his family now, because he could not let the streets take her the way they had taken so much from him already. He rocked her gently as her breathing steadied, the ragged gasps turning into soft, shallow breaths, her tiny hand clutching weakly at his shirt, her eyes closing as she drifted into a restless sleep. Germain held her close, his own eyes closing as he whispered to her, a promise that was as much for himself as it was for her. "I will protect you, Lily. I will save you, no matter what." And as the night wore on, the promise hung in the air, a fragile hope in the darkness, a small light against the cold, a reminder that even in a world that seemed determined to take everything from him, Germain still had the strength to fight for the life of a child who had been left in the trash, a child who now meant everything to him. The cold Detroit wind scraped against Germain's cheeks as he stepped outside, the morning sky heavy with clouds that threatened snow. He pulled his thin jacket tighter around his small frame, each breath a puff of steam that disappeared as quickly as it came. The street was empty at this hour, the broken glass glinting under the dull glow of the street lights, and the old beer cans rattled softly in the gutter as the wind rolled them along. He could hear the rumble of trucks on the freeway in the distance, a constant reminder that the world moved on, no matter who was hungry, no matter who was cold, no matter who was dying. Inside the small house, Lily's soft, wheezing breaths filled the silence like a slow drumbeat that Germain could not escape. She lay on the folded blankets in the corner of the storage room, her tiny chest rising and falling with effort, her lips pale and cracked, her eyelids fluttering every few seconds as if even in her sleep she could not find peace. Germain had spent the night beside her, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a damp cloth, feeding her drops of milk from a syringe he found in a box of old medical supplies at the back of the church. Mama John sat quietly in the next room, praying under her breath, her eyes dark with fear that she tried to hide each time she looked at him. Germain felt the fear too, gnawing at him from the inside every time Lily coughed, every time her breath caught in her throat, every time her small hands reached out blindly, searching for something to hold on to. He had tried everything he could think of, keeping her warm, feeding her small amounts whenever she would take it, holding her through the nights when she cried softly against his chest. But it wasn't enough. He knew it in the way she grew weaker each day, the way the color drained from her cheeks, the way her cries became softer and softer, until sometimes there was nothing but a faint squeak that broke his heart every time he heard it. That morning, as he stood in the cold air, Germain realized that if he did nothing, Lily would die. Just like that, quietly, in the corner of a storage room that smelled of damp cardboard and dust. She would die, and there would be no one to mourn her except for a boy who wasn't even her brother and a grandmother who was too tired and too sick to fight anymore. The thought made his chest tighten so painfully that he could barely breathe, his eyes burning as he looked up at the gray sky, the tears freezing on his cheeks almost as soon as they fell. He turned and started walking, his feet carrying him past the empty lots filled with rusted car frames and broken toys, past the liquor store with bars on the windows, past the abandoned church with graffiti scrawled across its doors. His mind was blank, the fear and the urgency pushing him forward, step by step, until he found himself standing in front of the old brick building that housed the neighborhood's only soup kitchen. The sign above the door was faded, the letters peeling, but the smell of warm food and coffee drifted out every time the door opened, reminding Germain of a warmth he had almost forgotten. Inside, the room was filled with people sitting at long tables, their coats still on, steam rising from the cups of coffee they held in trembling hands. The volunteers moved between them, refilling cups, handing out plates of watery soup and pieces of bread. Germain stood by the door for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands shaking as he tried to work up the courage to take another step. He had never come here before. He had always managed to find enough bottles, enough cans to keep from having to ask for help. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about Lily. He moved slowly toward the serving counter, the smells of coffee and soup mixing with the sharp scent of disinfectant that clung to the walls. A woman behind the counter looked up, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, her eyes tired but kind as they met his. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Germain's voice came out in a whisper that he could barely hear himself. "Please, I need help." The woman's eyes softened, and she stepped around the counter, guiding him to a quieter corner near the back, away from the noise and the eyes of the others. She knelt down so they were at eye level, her hands resting gently on his shoulders as she spoke. "What's your name, honey?" "Germain." "What do you need help with, Germain?" And the words came tumbling out, faster than he could control, his voice breaking as he told her about Lily, about finding her in the trash, about the way she struggled to breathe, about the fear that she would die, and there would be nothing he could do to stop it. He told her about Mama Jean, about Tina, about the cold house and the empty nights, and the promise he had made to a baby who wasn't even his, a promise that he would protect her, that he would keep her alive, no matter what it took. The woman listened, her eyes never leaving his, her hands steady on his shoulders as tears filled her eyes. When he finished, he was shaking, the tears running down his face as he tried to wipe them away with the back of his hand. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled him into a gentle hug, holding him there as he cried, the fear and the exhaustion pouring out of him in quiet sobs that shook his small frame. When she pulled back, she gave him a small, reassuring smile and told him to wait. She disappeared into the back of the kitchen, and when she returned, she was with another woman, younger, with dark curly hair and a camera hanging from her neck. She introduced herself as Miss Cara, a local journalist who sometimes came to the kitchen to write stories about the people in the neighborhood, stories that she hoped would make people care, would make them see what was happening in places they preferred to ignore. Miss Cara knelt down in front of Germain, her eyes serious but kind, and asked him to tell her about Lily. At first, Germain hesitated, fear gripping him again at the thought of what might happen if people found out, if the police came, if they took Lily away, if they took Tina away. But as he looked into Miss Kara's eyes, he saw something there that made him trust her, something that told him she would help, not hurt. He told her everything, holding nothing back, his voice quiet but clear as he spoke about the morning he found Lily, about the way her tiny hand had grabbed his finger, about the way she had looked at him with eyes that begged him not to leave her. He told her about the nights he spent holding her, about the fear that woke him in the middle of the night when she stopped breathing for a moment too long, about the promise he had made to her, a promise that he would not let the streets take her the way they had taken so many others. Miss Kara listened, her eyes wet with tears as she held her camera, snapping a few pictures of Germain as he spoke, his small hands clutching the frayed edges of his jacket, his eyes filled with a determination that seemed too big for a boy his age. When he finished, she thanked him, her voice soft, telling him that he was brave, that he was doing something many adults would not have the courage to do, that he was a hero, even if it didn't feel like it. She promised him that she would help, that she would tell Lily's story, that she would find people who could help him get the care Lily needed, who could help keep her alive. Germain nodded, the fear still there, but mixed now with a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better, that maybe there was a way to save Lily, to keep his promise to her. That night, when Germain returned home, he found Mama Jean waiting by the door, her eyes questioning as she looked at him, searching his face for answers. He told her what he had done, about the soup kitchen, about Miss Kara, about the promise she had made to help them. Mama Jean sank into her chair, her hands covering her face as she wept, the tears of a woman who had carried too many burdens for too long, tears of fear and hope tangled together as she whispered prayers under her breath, thanking God for sending help, begging him to keep Lily safe. Germain went to Lily, lifting her gently into his arms, feeling how light she was, how small, her breath shallow against his neck as he rocked her gently, whispering to her that help was coming, that he was keeping his promise, that she had to hold on just a little longer. Her small hand curled around his finger, her eyes fluttering open for a moment, and in that moment, he saw something that made his heart clench with hope. A small, weak smile, a flicker of light in the darkness that told him she was still fighting. That night, as the wind howled outside and the city of Detroit breathed its cold, restless breath, Germain held Lily close, whispering promises into the darkness, the weight of his words pressing into the silence around them. He promised her that she would live, that she would not die in the corner of a storage room, that she would grow up knowing that someone had fought for her, that she was loved, that she mattered. And as he held her, the world outside moved on. But inside that small, broken house, hope flickered to life, fragile and precious, a promise kept alive by a boy who refused to give up, a boy who was willing to step into the unknown to save the life of a child who had no one else. The rain had turned to snow, thin, wet flakes that fell in slow spirals through the broken light of the street lamps, settling into gray slush on the cracked sidewalks of Detroit. The city moved as it always did, restless and uncaring, cars hissing over wet streets, people huddled against the cold as they rushed from one place to another, never looking down long enough to see the stories that lay in the shadows. In a small house on a quiet street, Germain stood at the window, watching the snow fall, his breath fogging the cold glass as he held Lily close against his chest. She was weaker now, her small body trembling as she tried to breathe, her skin pale and clammy, her lips tinged blue even in the warmth of the blankets that Mama John layered around her each night. The soft wheezing of her breath filled the silence of the room, a sound that had become the background to every moment of Germain's life, a reminder that time was running out, that promises alone would not be enough to keep her alive. Mama Jean moved slowly around the house, her steps careful as she tried to keep the rooms warm, the small heater rattling in the corner, the gas stove in the kitchen left on low to add what little heat it could to the cold air that pressed in around them. Tina played quietly in the corner with her bear, glancing over at Lily with wide, worried eyes, her small fingers pulling at the frayed edges of the bear's ear as she rocked it in her arms, mimicking the way Germain held Lily when she cried. The fear was constant now, a weight that pressed down on Germain's chest until it was hard to breathe, hard to think of anything except the sound of Lily's breathing, the way it caught in her throat, the small, pained gasps that came when she tried to cry. He had learned to count the seconds between her breaths, to watch the rise and fall of her chest with the focus of someone who knew that one missed breath could mean the end of everything. Miss Kara's article had come out 2 days ago, her words painted across the small screen of Mama Jean's old phone as Germain read them over and over, the headline a promise that help was coming. Abandoned but not alone, the boy who refused to let her die. There was a picture of Germain, his eyes wide and dark, his small hands clutching Lily to his chest, her face turned toward the camera, her eyes closed, her small hand resting against his shirt. The article had spread quickly, shared by people across the city, across the country, strangers sending messages of hope, prayers, promises of help. Donations began to trickle in, small amounts at first, a few dollars here and there, enough to buy more formula, enough to keep the heater on through the cold nights. And then more came, larger donations from people whose names Germain did not know, people who saw Lily's small, fragile body and could not turn away, people who read about Germain's promise and felt something inside themselves move. Miss Kara called to tell them that a local charity had offered to help, that they had spoken to doctors who were willing to look at Lily, to see what could be done to try and save her life. Germain listened, the phone pressed to his ear, his hand shaking so badly that he almost dropped it, his heart pounding in his chest so loudly that he could barely hear her words. When he hung up, he turned to Mama Jean, who was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, her hand pressed to her mouth as she tried to hold back the sob that broke free when Germain nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks as he whispered, "They're going to help her, Mama. They're going to save her." The next morning, they wrapped Lily in every blanket they had, tucking her into Germain's arms as he stepped out into the cold, the snow falling around them in soft, silent waves as he walked down the street toward the car waiting at the corner. Miss Kara was there, her eyes bright with tears as she opened the door, helping Germain into the back seat, her hands gentle as she adjusted the blankets around Lily, her fingers brushing over the baby's small cheek with a tenderness that made Germain's throat tighten. The hospital was bright and clean, the smell of antiseptic sharp in Germain's nose as he followed the nurses through the hallways, clutching Lily to his chest, her small body hidden in the folds of the blankets, her breathing shallow and uneven as she whimpered softly against him. The doctor's spoken words Germain didn't understand, their voices low and serious as they examined Lily, checking her heart, listening to her breathing, their faces tight with concern as they looked at the oxygen levels, the color of her skin, the way her tiny chest moved as she struggled to draw in each breath. They told Germaine that Lily had a congenital heart defect, that her heart was too weak, that it could not pump blood the way it needed to, that without surgery, she would not survive. The words fell on him like a weight, each one pressing deeper, the fear turned into something sharp that cut through him with every breath he took. He looked down at Lily, her eyes opening for a moment, unfocused and glazed, her small hand reaching out weakly before falling back against her chest. And he knew that he could not let her die, that he could not let the world take her the way it had taken so many others. The doctors explained the surgery, the risks, the costs, the reality that even with help, even with donations, it would be a struggle to cover everything she needed. But the charity had agreed to help. The donations would cover the initial costs and the hospital would work with them to make sure Lily had a chance. A chance. That was all Germaine needed to hear. The day of the surgery, Germaine sat in the waiting room, Mama Jean beside him, her hand gripping his so tightly that it hurt, but he did not pull away. Miss Kara was there too, sitting across from them, her camera resting in her lap, her eyes red as she watched Germaine, offering him small smiles that were meant to be comforting, but did nothing to ease the fear that sat like a stone in his chest. The hours passed slowly, each minute stretching out into forever, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall loud in the silence, the buzz of voices in the background fading in and out as Germaine's mind replayed every moment he had spent with Lily, every promise he had made, every breath she had taken as he held her through the nights. He closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayers, promises whispered to a God he was not sure was listening, begging for one more chance, one more day, one more breath. When the doctor finally came out, his face tired but smiling, Germaine felt his knees go weak, his vision blurring as the words sank in. The surgery was a success. Lily was alive. She would need time to recover. There would still be challenges, but she had made it through, her heart beating stronger now, her body fighting to live. Germaine fell into Mama John's arms, the sobs breaking free as the weight of the fear lifted, replaced by a hope so powerful it made his chest ache. They were allowed to see her, the machines around her bed beeping softly, tubes and wires connected to her small body, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of her breathing, her face pale but peaceful, her tiny hand resting against the blanket as if she were reaching for something in her dreams. Germaine reached out, taking her hand in his, tears streaming down his cheeks as he whispered to her, telling her that she was strong, that she was brave, that she had kept her promise to him just as he had kept his to her. In that moment, as the snow fell outside the hospital window, covering the city in a blanket of white, Germaine knew that the fight was not over, that there would still be challenges, still be nights of fear and days of struggle. But for now, Lily was alive, and that was enough. That was everything. As they left the hospital that night, Miss Kara walking beside them, the cold air biting at their faces, Germaine looked up at the sky, the snowflakes landing on his cheeks, melting into the tears that still clung to his skin. He held Lily close, her small body warm against his chest, her breathing soft and steady, and he whispered to her, a promise for the future. A promise that he would never stop fighting for her, that he would never let the world take her from him. And in the quiet of that snowy night, with the lights of the city shining around them, Germaine took his first deep breath in weeks, the fear lifting just enough for him to see the path ahead, the road they would walk together, the promise of tomorrow waiting for them just beyond the horizon. The cold was less biting now, the snow beginning to melt in small rivers along the cracked sidewalks, washing the grime of winter into the drains of Detroit's tired streets. The sky still hung heavy and gray, but every now and then the sun broke through in fleeting moments, lighting up the city in patches of gold before disappearing again, as if reminding everyone that warmth was still possible, even here. Germain felt that warmth every time he held Lily, her small body pressed against his chest, her breathing steady now, each soft exhale a promise that the fight had been worth it. The hospital had allowed them to take Lily home, her recovery progressing faster than the doctors had expected, her strength surprising them all. They had shown Germain how to check her bandages, how to measure her temperature, how to watch for the signs that something might be wrong. Each instruction was burned into his mind. Each word another responsibility added to the growing list he carried on his narrow shoulders. But he didn't complain. He welcomed it, because it meant Lily was alive, and that was enough. Mama Jean had prepared a small corner of the living room for Lily, moving an old dresser to make space for the crib a local church had donated after reading about their story. The crib was painted a soft yellow, chipped in places, but to Germain, it looked like hope itself, a small safe place where Lily could sleep without the cold, concrete floor beneath her, without the damp blankets that smelled of mildew and fear. Tina was fascinated by the crib, standing on tiptoes to peek inside, her wide eyes watching as Lily slept, her small hand reaching in to stroke Lily's soft hair, whispering to her the way Germain did, promises of stories and games, of shared secrets between sisters who had found each other in a world that had nearly taken everything from them. Germain's days began before dawn, as they always had, but now his mornings were filled with purpose that felt lighter than before, the weight of survival softened by the knowledge that Lily was breathing, living, growing stronger. He still slipped out into the cold, the straps of his bag digging into his shoulders as he moved through the alleys and behind stores, collecting bottles and cans, moving quickly before the older boys could find him, before the streets became dangerous with the rising sun. Each can he dropped into his bag was another small victory, each bottle another step toward keeping the heater running, keeping milk in Lily's bottle, keeping Tina's belly full enough that she could sleep through the night. After the depot, he would return home, his hands cold, his face flushed from the wind, but his heart warm as he stepped through the door to see Lily in the crib, her eyes following him as he moved through the room, a soft gurgle escaping her lips that made Tina clap her hands and Mama Jean smile through the tiredness that never fully left her face. They were together, and that was enough. Word of Lily's recovery had spread. The story of the boy who found a baby in the trash and refused to let her die reaching people across the city, across the country. Donations continued to come in, small amounts from people who sent prayers along with their dollars, messages that Mama Jean read aloud at the dinner table, her voice trembling as she spoke the words of strangers who said they believed in Germain, who said they were praying for Lily, for Tina, for Mama Jean, for a family that had become a symbol of hope in a place that so often felt hopeless. The local church invited them to Sunday services, the pastor shaking Germain's hand, his eyes warm as he spoke words of encouragement, words that made Mama Jean close her eyes and whisper prayers of thanks under her breath. Tina loved the songs, clapping along off-beat, her laughter ringing through the small church as the choir sang, her small body swaying to the rhythm as she held on to Mama Jean's hand. Lily slept through most of it, but every now and then her eyes would open and she would look around, her gaze calm, as if she understood that she was surrounded by people who loved her, people who would fight for her no matter what. Germain found small jobs around the neighborhood, fixing bikes for the kids who couldn't afford to take them to the shop, shoveling snow off the steps of the church, helping carry groceries for the older neighbors who smiled at him with eyes that were tired but kind. They paid him in small bills, in warm meals, in second-hand clothes for Tina and Lily, in words of thanks that Germain tucked into his heart, reminders that even in a place like this, kindness could still exist. That community could still mean something. At night, after Tina was asleep and Mama Jean had settled into her chair by the window, Germain would sit by the crib watching Lily as she slept, her breathing slow and even, her small hands curling and uncurling in dreams he could only imagine. He would talk to her in whispers, telling her about the day, about the people they had met, about the bottles he had collected, the bikes he had fixed, the meals they had shared. He would tell her about the world outside their small house, about the cold and the danger, but also about the moments of warmth, the moments of hope, the moments that made the fear worth facing. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows and the cold seeped into the cracks of the walls, Germain would remember the day he found Lily, the way she had looked up at him with eyes that were too tired for a baby, the way her small hand had grabbed his finger, the way her tiny body had felt in his arms as he carried her home. He would remember the fear, the uncertainty, the nights spent begging God not to take her, not yet, not like that. And he would look at her now, sleeping peacefully in the crib that had been given to them by people who cared, breathing steadily with a heart that was stronger now, and he would know that every moment of fear had been worth it. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Germain found himself standing in the kitchen, watching Lily in her crib, Tina sitting beside her, humming softly as she rocked her bear back and forth. Mama Jean was stirring a pot of oatmeal on the stove, the smell filling the small kitchen, warm and comforting, a reminder that they had made it through another night. Germain felt something in his chest, something that felt like hope, something that felt like the warmth of the sun on his face, something that felt like the promise of tomorrow. He stepped forward, lifting Lily from the crib, holding her close as she blinked up at him, her eyes bright, her small hand reaching up to touch his cheek. He smiled at her, a smile that felt like it reached every corner of his being. A smile that told her without words that she was safe, that she was loved, that she would never be alone again. Tina giggled, reaching up to touch Lily's tiny foot, and Mama Jean turned from the stove, her eyes soft as she watched them, the lines on her face easing for a moment as she saw the family they had become. That night, after the dishes had been washed and the house had settled into the quiet hum of the heater and the soft breathing of those he loved, Germain stood by the window, looking out at the city, the lights flickering in the distance, the snow melting into small rivers that carried away the dirt and the cold of winter. He held Lily in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder, her small breaths warm against his neck, and he closed his eyes, breathing in the moment, letting it fill him with the strength he would need for the days to come. Because the fight was not over. The world was still hard, still cold, still dangerous, and there would be days when fear would press against him like a weight too heavy to carry. But as he held Lily, as he listened to her steady breathing, as he felt the warmth of her small body against his, Germain knew that they had already won something that could never be taken from them. They had found each other. They had chosen to fight. And that choice had brought them a new life, a life that was theirs, a life that was worth every moment of pain, every moment of fear, every tear they had shed in the dark. And in that small house, on that quiet street in Detroit, with the snow melting outside and the promise of spring in the air, Germain whispered to Lily, his words a promise for tomorrow, a promise for every tomorrow that would come. "You're safe now, Lily. We're going to be okay. I promise." The days were getting longer now, the cold easing its grip on Detroit's cracked streets as spring crept in quietly, bringing with it a softness in the air that felt like a promise. The trees along the sidewalks were still bare, but here and there small buds had begun to appear, tiny bursts of green that seemed to whisper that it was possible to grow even in places where nothing was meant to survive. Inside the small house that had become their world, Germain moved quietly through the rooms, the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, a familiar sound that felt like home. Lily had grown stronger, her cheeks no longer hollow, her eyes bright and curious as they followed Germain around the room, her small hands reaching for him whenever he passed by. She had learned to laugh, a soft, bubbling sound that filled the house with warmth, the kind of sound that made Mama Jean pause in her work, closing her eyes for a moment as she let it wash over her, a reminder that there was still beauty in a world that had so often felt unforgiving. Tina was never far from Lily's side, sitting beside her crib with her bear in her lap, whispering stories in her small, serious voice, telling Lily about the games they would play, the secrets they would share, the world they would explore together when Lily was strong enough to walk beside her. Germain's days began early, as they always had, the sunrise greeting him as he stepped out into the cool morning air, the sky above slowly shifting from gray to the soft pinks and blues of dawn. His bag was lighter now, not because there was less to carry, but because the burden felt different. The weight of survival eased by the knowledge that they were not alone, that there were people who saw them, who cared, who believed in the fight they were waging every day. The community had rallied around them. The story of the boy who had saved the baby in the trash turned into something bigger, something that belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen, everyone who had ever struggled in the quiet corners of a city that moved too fast to notice. People stopped Germain on the street, pressing small bills into his hands, slipping notes into his bag with words of encouragement, prayers written in careful handwriting, promises that they were not alone. The church continued to support them, bringing meals to their door, offering help with the bills that came in small stacks, each one a reminder of the world outside their walls. Germain found more work around the neighborhood, repairing bicycles for the children who followed him around, their laughter ringing through the alleys as they raced up and down the street on the bikes he had fixed, the chains oiled, the tires patched, the brakes working for the first time in months. The neighbors would smile as they watched, some of them offering him small jobs, paying him with warm meals, with clothes for Tina and Lily, with words that warmed him in a way the sun could not. Mama Jean's health was still fragile, but she moved through the house with purpose, her hands steady as she prepared meals, her voice soft as she read to Tina and Lily, her prayers whispered over them as they slept, a shield against the world that waited beyond their door. She watched Germain with pride, the lines on her face softening when he entered the room, her eyes following him as he lifted Lily into his arms, as he rocked her to sleep, as he whispered to her the stories of who she was, who she would become, the destiny she carried within her small, beating heart. School had begun for Tina, and each morning Germain would walk her to the corner, holding her hand as they waited for the bus, her small backpack nearly as big as she was, the bright pink color standing out against the gray of the city. She would wave to him from the window as the bus pulled away, her smile bright, her excitement for the day ahead infectious, a reminder that the world could still be a place of hope, of dreams waiting to be chased. At night, after the house had settled into quiet, the soft hum of the heater mixing with the gentle breathing of those he loved, Germain would sit by the window, Lily in his arms, her head resting against his chest as she slept. He would look out at the city, the lights flickering in the distance, the shadows stretching across the streets, and he would think of the journey they had taken, the battles they had fought, the fear they had faced together. He would think of the day he found Lily, of the way her tiny hand had reached for him, of the promise he had made to her in the quiet of that cold morning, a promise that had become the foundation of everything they had built. Lily was more than just the baby he had saved. She was a symbol of everything they had survived, everything they had fought for, everything they had become. She was the laughter in their home, the hope in their hearts, the promise of a future that felt possible now, even in a world that had once felt determined to take everything from them. She was their family, their destiny, the reminder that love was not defined by blood, but by the choices they made, the promises they kept, the fights they refused to walk away from. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and pink across the sky, Germain took Lily outside, wrapping her in a soft blanket as he carried her down the steps, Tina following close behind, her hand gripping his shirt as she skipped down to the sidewalk. They stood together, watching the children of the neighborhood play, their laughter echoing through the air, the sound of basketballs bouncing on the cracked pavement, the squeak of bicycle tires as they turned tight corners, the calls of parents telling their children it was time to come home. Tina looked up at Germain, her eyes bright, her smile wide as she reached up to touch Lily's hand where it peeked out from the blanket. "She's getting strong, isn't she?" she asked, her voice filled with the innocence of a child who had learned too early what it meant to fight for something. Germain nodded, looking down at Lily, her eyes open, watching the world around her with quiet curiosity. "She is," he said softly, his voice filled with a pride that warmed him from the inside. "She's stronger than all of us." Mama John stepped out onto the porch, watching them with a smile that spoke of pride and gratitude, of prayers answered and hopes restored. She called them back inside as the air grew colder, the sun dipping below the rooftops, the streetlights flickering on as the darkness settled in. Germain carried Lily back up the steps, Tina skipping beside him, her laughter ringing out as she chased the last rays of sunlight across the porch. That night, as they sat together in the small living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm light on their faces, Germain felt the weight of the journey they had taken, the battles they had fought, the love they had built, the family they had created. He looked at Mama Jean, at Tina, at Lily, and he knew that they had done more than survive. They had lived. They had chosen hope over fear, love over despair, faith over doubt. And in that moment, as Lily slept peacefully in his arms, her breathing soft and steady, her small hand clutching his shirt, Germain whispered to her, a promise that was as much for himself as it was for her. "You're safe, Lily. We're all safe now. This is our family. This is our destiny." Outside, the city of Detroit breathed around them, restless and alive, but inside that small, warm house, Germain knew that they had carved out a place of their own, a place where hope lived, where love was stronger than fear, where the promise of tomorrow was real. And for the first time in a long time, Germain allowed himself to believe that they were going to be okay. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true life stories that inspire and heal. Share this video with someone who needs hope today and check out our other videos to continue this journey with us. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.